Hello and welcome to the podcast number 2 from SfS, Smoke and Fire Safety. Here is Marco and I'm the Product and Marketing Manager. SfS is part of Exyte Hargreaves and we are here to offer our expertise from design to commissioning of smoke control systems. We are interested in supporting the industry and through the experts we work with and we talk to every day, we want to get and share different perspectives, insights, and provide an understanding of what is happening on our fast-paced changing industry. We will be today focused on listening to the experts' opinion, and we will be absolutely impartial. We would like to be your focal point of knowledge, so if you have any questions with regards to fire and smoke safety, please get in touch. We're here to help you and support you with your questions and projects. Today, here with us, we have Paul McSoley, and can I ask you, Paul, to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Paul McSoley. I work in construction. I've been in it for over 25 years. I've had various roles, Marco, from being an apprentice originally, right up to leading design on big major projects, some MEP and all various subjects. I'm heavily involved in testing of products at the moment and getting things installed and procured correctly on various different parts of the business that I work for. And yeah, but it pretty much sums it up for me. It's all about getting this difficult subject of fire compliance into an order and how procurement affects it.
Yeah, I think today's topic will be quite interesting. So we would like to discuss about construction procurement and behavior. So it sounds quite huge, as a
It's an interesting one. I think it's making sure that in the future we don't carry on as we have done in the past, really. So
I guess if you come up with such a big topic, something for sure down the line has happened. So you spent quite a number of years in the industry. If we are, let's say, to start with the initial problems you had maybe beginning your career 15, 20, 25 years ago, what do you think the behavior was and how was the industry on those days?
I think if I cast my mind back when I was working in my early days over near the Wharf and places like that, I think that the big difference was there's a bit more of an influence from building control at the time because I had a bit more, I suppose, a bit more responsibility in ensuring that things were, I say the word compliant, but were reasonably safe and things were put together appropriately. But you also got to remember that standards back then were not as, I suppose, rigorous with direct fields and extended fields of application like they are now. So it was a slightly different world. And I think when you look, as I've gone through my career and you've seen regulatory reform coming where, building control stopped issuing fire certificates, it became a lot more self-certified. There was a step change that was, kind of required on how we procure and how we put things together. But I'm not too sure it step changed the way it could have done. And it's through, I don't think it's for anyone's fault. I think it's the industry's become a lot more complicated than it was in my early career. It's a lot more technical is probably the word I'm looking for.
It's quite interesting because you did say self certified, and self certification then led to a more complex industry. Can you explain these a little bit in detail?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that though we've always had a responsibility to make sure that we get the right products appropriate for the application for where you could say their intended purpose is appropriate for it. Um, the application now of doing it, if you take the various subjects, which you could say, smoke control ducts and dampers, or fire dampers, pipework seals. You could even talk about fire curtains, even talking about, chimneys, flues. There's fields of how you apply those now to install them. So we have to just make sure that what we're buying is appropriate for the circumstances for where they're installed. So I think the behaviour, kind of used to be, and it is all about behaviours that you'd have one of these fire stopping companies, and there's some good companies out there that do this subject and come in and install all of this stuff. But it's kind of a bit more hamstrung now because when you look at pipe work, which it's got its own standard for how you do penetration seals, how you procure that is not the same as how you procure dampers or duct or flues because they've got their own penetration seal which has got a different set of rules. So it's become a lot more tricky in how you procure stuff. And not forgetting the walls here, Marco, as well. It's all about the standard supporting construction that's used, whether it's a partition or a rigid wall. all these things affect, your solution. Solution isn't probably the right word, but the final outcome of how you want to get this thing, procured and installed at what time you do it. So you can't really just rely on a fire stopping company at the end, with a mastic gun and I suppose a bread knife and a bit of bat to come and fix everything, because some of these solutions don't involve those products. It's a slightly different world to what it was when I started my career.
I remember the beginning of my career in fire around about 14 years ago. And I do remember, but still they are in the marketplace, these big cans of PU foam claiming they're 3, 4, 6, 12 hours fire rated. But are people sure they're buying the right product for the right application? And have people been trained on using and selecting the right products for the right application, do you think, over the last 10 to 12 years?
I think what it is, Marco, is that we've got construction product regulations here as well, and a more rigorous testing regime. So I think that the hard bit with the, I suppose, the behaviour of this is that if you're going to buy, you say, I'd use a fire damper as an example, you're going to put it in a building. And I'm going to use a very important word that I was taught recently: the ontology of where you put it, the risk category of the space and the risk category of the building that affects the classification of the product that you're buying. So if you're buying a fire damper and you're procuring it at the end because maybe you think you're getting best value by waiting for a tier 1 or a tier 2 set of contractors to procure it, if it's not coordinated with the wall types that you have for the risk class at the start, there's a good chance the two aren't going to be compatible, because the damper, the wall, with a door in it as well, where we've got a flue in it, is a system approach. It's not just about buying individual silo components later on to get the best value in procurement. The trick is to get all of this stuff procured at the start, or understand the applicability of it to the wall system or the floor system or the type of building you have, so you can get the right products for the right fire case example at the start of the job, not leaving it to the end.
And do you think there are grey areas where still, despite having people trained to do their jobs, despite having people aware and knowing everything about the CPR, do you still think there are certain areas where there is this lack of knowledge and lack of coordination, where we can, try to influence, create some background knowledge and make sure people then are doing their own thing in a compliant way?
Yeah, I think there is, Mark. I think that the big thing here is we need to help everyone with this subject because it's so vast. We need to help clients, we need to help consultants, whether it's an architect or an MEP consultant. We also need to help the fire engineering community as well, because this is all about products, and these products are very complicated how they're tested, and the seals that go with them, you could call them passive fire seals rather than say use the word fire stopping, because it's quite, it's a little bit generic when it's used. They've all got different rules. You've all got different applications for these products, and it all depends on the risk category of the building, the risk category of the space. And there's not one, person, whether it's an architect or a fire engineer or MEP consultant, that's expert at any of these one subjects generally. So you have to help them bring it all together. So even the manufacturers, to get something specified, especially in the smoke control world, you need to go to a smoke control damper company or ductwork company and tell them very prescriptively what you need. So you need to know the description of it in the first place. Whether your system's got 1,000 pascals of pressure. And I know that the last podcast, some of this was covered in obviously excellent detail because of the author of that podcast. But you need to go to these manufacturers with this information, because otherwise you've not checked the risk categories of your space. And they're just, in fairness, they're just giving you a product. So there's a bit more help we all need to do to get together to get this right. You can't just I suppose push this risk down the line to a manufacturer or contractor. You still got to do the early bit about, as I say, the ontology of what you're looking at. So you've got to understand the risk category of the space, the risk category of the building, the system approach of it, how it all works together, how the walls fit in, how the floor slabs fit in. Even down to what your compartmentation strategies and rises. If you get that wrong, it can cause you a big issue. This is all about classification of products. E over ES for dampers. ES is where you have a low leakage, a smoke risk in a building. and he can just be a very simple compartment where you have no low leakage risk for smoke. But if you don't get that right at the start and tell a manufacturer what you want, you will get the wrong product not appropriate for the circumstances where you're installing it. So with the procurement problem that that kind of exists, it's getting this stuff earlier on described in such a way that everyone understands what it is that you need. And you probably could say if you do this the right way, you're actually just fulfilling the golden thread for each individual subject within the building, whether it's a smoke control system, a fire damper, or a fire rated duct, or even for a flue. You've got to look at that procurement question earlier on, how we can do, I suppose you could call it modern methods of procurement rather than procuring as we have done in the past.
And I think you touched a very valid point. So methods of procurement. Procurement at the end of the day is always team to people, and behind specifications we have people again. I think specifiers are very, very prepared. They know what they're writing, and they are very, very clear. But down the line, down the chain, there will always be that procurement manager or that QS that will challenge the initial specification and probably cut a little bit of costs and probably reduce the building performance. So how can we influence these purchasing departments and these maybe not so technical people in order for them to be aware that certain things cannot be touched?
It's a great one. This is if you're trying to cut the fat off for something, you don't know it was in the first place. What you actually cutting the fat off of. So think of it probably this way: is that if you're going to select, as sort of indicated earlier, a smoke control system, and you want to, engineer it to a cheaper specification. The specification's a bit of a, I suppose, a bit of a funny word, really. Because if you're going to specify something like a smoke control system, you've got to specify the classification of all the componentry within it. And I think there is standards for how you procure, design, install these systems from cradle to grave that I don't think get used very well, but they're very good standards you can put together. So if you're going to do that, even for fire dampers or a door, someone's got to have described what it was originally. So is it a C10,000, C mod smoke control system? Is it multi? Is it AA? Is it MA? You've got to describe all of this stuff. So if you actually think of it in this order, if you get to the point where it's described to the point where it meets the risk or the safety case of the building and everyone's bought into that, then it's about a product to meet it. And you can swap between products to meet that descriptive, but the minute that product that you prescriptively want to purchase changes that descriptive, you've got to go revisit your safety case for the building. So that's the problem, is that we're actually engineering down from something, or cutting the fat off, you could say, down, but you don't actually know what it was intended to be in the first place. That's kind of the issue. That's the bit we've got to kind of correct. So, better procurement will come from, better descriptive and specifications and more support, with design teams to get it right. But you can't, you know, you can't have procurement that works better if you have a situation where a whole design team is in the boat where they've been asked to not specify stuff because a contractor's going to do it later on for best value. I suppose you could probably say, if you don't look at this stuff early on when you're setting the shape and form of a building, don't be surprised that when you do select the kit later on, where it could be months or years later, that the shape and form of your building doesn't work to house that kit, because you've got to describe it first. And if you describe it, you can prescribe it, then you can verify the space within the building. And you don't necessarily need to always have specialists on board, but some of this you may need to if it's outside the relative competence of everyone that's looking at it from a design team. But it's about having the support in there so you can actually describe the systems properly. So you can describe a wall, describe a door, describe a damper, describe a duct. And if you can describe it properly with its various classifications and thicknesses and densities of wall, you can actually get to the point where you can procure it later on, but in the knowledge that actually the shape and form works. Because it's even down to installation and access for some of this kit. It's not being allowed for because we don't see this until the procurement comes on months after the frame could be going up.
So I think in here, what is key is to have a proper specification clause described by the manufacturer, and that should be available to specifiers, to procurement manager. That should be available to everybody. I think, despite the platform maybe where these specification clauses are loaded, this should be public knowledge.
Well, I think it's the behavioural thing, isn't it? We have to get to a point where if a consultant's going to specify a smoke control system, because that's part of your guys' field, or even a damper, you've got to have a list of all the classifications that are important. And that doesn't just include the 120 minutes, the E, the S, the C10,000 or C mod. It also includes the opposed blade, the single blades, whatever you're doing, because that affects authority of air balancing in systems. You've got to be able to commission it. In order to commission it, you've got to know how it operates. That's all part of that descriptive. Have you got 6 fire zones and a smoke zone? Because if you have, there's definitely going to be a chance you're going to need an MA system where the fan can shut the zones down if there's a problem, because compartmentation beats the smoke zones. You have to look at all of these things. But the behavior is, if we don't engage, some specialists or manufacturers and actually look at what the descriptive is properly in the first place, then you can't really look at the whole, the fit of the building until it's too late. So if you procure late, you're going to get that issue where that procurement process drives your own issue with spatial fit in a building is probably one example. But also it's about the interfaces of it, the walls, the follow-on, the interface of various things. The walls being the biggest one. What walls are so important, making sure you've got the right type of support in construction. So that's the behavioural thing, is that if we're going to carry on procuring stuff very, very late, then you're not going to see some of the problems till it comes forward. And actually, probably the better value in it is actually getting these products known early on, checking your spatial fit, making sure you describe the system. Then you can look at, variances in different manufacturers, but around an actually set of information that actually is, I suppose you could say, descriptively correct for the risk category of the building. So, you're not affecting how you've done your safety case from cradle to grave. So.
And when it comes to description, do you think that BIM is playing a key role and a key part now with procurement and with the industry?
I think BIM is probably going to be the biggest thing with this, Marco, because I think that if you look at where we sit at the moment, and to put it into the right context, is that if you look at classification of a smoke control damper, and you look at classification of a fire damper, they're different. And when you look at what you put in a BIM model, and you sit there and you go, certain things affect the asset, certain things affect the geometry, certain things can be PDF held. Now, if you look at the asset information that's required, you need to record what the rating was, what the pressure was, the type of blade. You need to record all of this stuff, because if someone's going to change it later on, you look at this from the whole golden thread point of view, you need to know what you changed it from to, and actually, are you affecting that original risk class of the building? It's so important, because people will get caught out with this if they're not careful.
That's a key point. I'm also thinking about a recent event we've been to. It was a young engineering networking event, and we had the chance to meet with these young graduates of people still at university doing their own trainings. So if you could give an advice to a young engineer approaching the industry, or maybe getting into the industry over the next 12 to 36 months, what would be your biggest statement or recommendation, or what would you say to these young people approaching our world?
I would say that construction is probably the most rewarding career you will ever do. And you can be in so many different parts of it, Marco, and it's rewarding. You can be in procurement, you can be in commercial, you can be in delivery, you can be in design, you can be in any part of it you want to be in. The biggest advice is that it doesn't work in silos. It's all about a system approach. So understanding, in the famous words of someone else recently, that it's not just, say, all M&E, it's building services. It's the fact that an air system works on the integrity of the walls and the structure of the building being complete. If that isn't there, you can't test the smoke control system anyway, because the air is going to leak everywhere. So you have to look at it from a system approach. But it's not just about the engineering of the systems, it's about the products as well. Understand the products that you're buying. For me, this has served me well most of my career, is that regulation 8 is about reasonable levels of safety, health, and people and buildings are affected by, and regulation 7 to me was always about appropriate for the circumstances for which you're installing it, installed in a workmanlike manner. Make sure you understand what that is, all the stuff that you're actually buying, how you're putting it together. Does it work for the function it's designed to do? Is it reasonably safe? is it going to cause safety for everyone that's in the building? Is it going to cause no one harm? Try and keep your integrity and keep things, as best as you can in your career. Always continue to learn as well. It's a brilliant place, construction.
That's great. And I think I have my last question now, unless you have something else you want to add generically. But for me, what would be your advice, not just to young people, but just in general for our industry, for the future, and for the years to come?
Oh, that's a very big question.
I
I
know.
think, look, one of the biggest things is that as an industry, we just got to make sure that we all go the same direction, because I think construction's going to get a lot more technical over the next few years, especially with the new regulator kicking in, and you could say really we've got to start doing things really, really well. Be a lot more probably thorough in how we not just procure, but how we install, and make sure everyone's kind of, I suppose the word's educated and what some of the language is, because I'm not knocking it, Marco. It is very, very difficult when you start talking about types of wall, and especially when you start explaining that flexible partitions within 520 board as an example is a standard supporting symmetrical construction, and other constructions that aren't made with the same materials aren't. A lot of this comes into it, and it's also supporting each other with it as well, because not one consultant can do this on their own. You need a lot more holistic team approach to get it correct. That's probably the best way I could describe it, is that I think it is going to get more technical, and we're going to need to work a lot harder together to get it right, and especially a lot earlier on, with products, getting the right product for the right location installed appropriately.
Thank you, Paul. I think you just deliver a great message of unity, awareness, and at the end of the day, we all have to work as a team. If we don't work together, and if we are not, say, prepared to work together, but also prepared mentally to change a little bit our mindset, that'll be quite challenging. I would like to say thank you very much for giving us your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Marco, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. And this podcast will be published on our YouTube channel, on our podcast platform on SoundCloud, and RSS feeded onto all major podcast libraries. Thank you very much from SfS Smoke Fire Safety. Reach us out at www.smokefiresafety.co.uk, and if you have any question, we are here for you. Thank you very much.